Welcome to the channel. Tonight, Poirot and Hastings find themselves at a secluded country lodge where a weekend of cards, laughter, and romance takes a sinister turn. Pride and jealousy are dealt into the game, and soon the stakes rise to life and death. This tale, A Game of Hearts, is an original mystery crafted in homage to Agatha Christie and her brilliant detective, Hercule Poirot. It draws inspiration from the real-life murder of William Ware, one of Regency England's most infamous gambling crimes. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? It's always a delight to see our growing community of mystery lovers from across the globe, and your words of encouragement mean the world to me. Creating these stories, writing, narration, and illustration, takes many hours of passion and care. If you enjoy this work, consider joining our membership for ad-free listening and exclusive mysteries. But even if you simply watch, comment, or share, your support helps keep these tales alive. Now settle in, pour yourself something warm, and let the story unfold. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Wealdon Lodge. It is a curious pattern in my friendship with Hercule Poirot that tranquility never lasts long. Just when life seems contentedly uneventful, fate, or rather Poirot's extraordinary talent for attracting trouble, ushers us into another affair of remarkable intrigue. Such was the case one brisk March morning when a casual encounter at my club drew me into what Poirot later described with some relish as l'affaire Wealdon. I had settled comfortably in the smoking room after breakfast, half hidden behind the Times, when a hearty voice startled me out of my reverie. "Hastings, old man! By Jove, it is you!" The speaker was Reginald Frobisher, tall, broad-shouldered, and eternally sunburnt, the very picture of English vigour. I had served with him briefly during the war, and since then he'd remained a fixture of the club, cheerful, impulsive, and perpetually engaged in some new sporting enthusiasm. One month it was polo, the next trout fishing, and last I'd heard he had taken to both boxing and poker with equal enthusiasm. "Doing anything this weekend?" he demanded, clapping me on the shoulder with such force that my paper fluttered to the floor. "Nothing in particular," I admitted. "Splendid. Then you must come down to Wealdon Lodge, my uncle's place in Hertfordshire. Bit of shooting, a few hands of poker, good company, and plenty of wine. Bring along your Belgian friend too, Monsieur Poirot, isn't it? Heard heaps about him. Would be a jolly good show to have him down." Before I could protest, he was off again, offering vague promises of a fascinating crowd and disappearing toward the bar, leaving me both amused and faintly intrigued. That evening, back at our flat in Whitehaven Mansions, I relayed the invitation to Poirot. He was delicately adjusting the wick of a candle, though the electric lights glowed perfectly well above us. "My dear Hastings," he said, peering at me over the curve of his immaculate moustache, "you look as though you have committed a crime or are about to. Come confess." I explained Frobisher's offer in full. Poirot listened intently, his head cocked like a sparrow examining a breadcrumb. "Poker, Hastings. Always it is the poker," he sighed. "A game where logic has no voice and chance rules the table. And chance, mon ami, is like a woman, beautiful but treacherous." I chuckled. "Surely even you might enjoy a weekend of country air and mild diversion." He lifted his eyes heavenward in theatrical despair. The countryside, muddy boots, cold corridors, and the English passion for overboiled vegetables. Mon Dieu, they murder the poor carrot until it dies a second death from boredom. No, no, Hastings, it is barbaric. Still, I could see his curiosity stirring. "Tell me," he said, "who will be present?" "Reggie mentioned a lively group," I replied. "Some of his sporting friends, perhaps a lady or two." At that, Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, Where there are gentlemen who gamble and ladies who smile, there will be jealousy, vanity, and very possibly crime. Yes, my friend, I think we shall go." And so, the following Saturday found us rumbling out of London in a hired motor car, the March wind cutting cold across the fields. Poirot sat beside me, bundled in his heavy overcoat, looking like an affronted dormouse. "Observe, Hastings," he said, gesturing toward the passing hedgerows. "You call this charming countryside. I call it the grave of civilization. Mud everywhere, drafts under every door, and hay that provokes sneezing. Bah! But," he added with a faint smile, "where men pretend to seek sport, they often hunt something more elusive, perhaps power, perhaps revenge." Wheeldon Lodge stood a short distance from the village, a sprawling red-brick manor that wore its age comfortably. Smoke curled from its chimneys, and dogs barked cheerfully as we pulled up. The house had that unmistakable air of English hospitality, warm yet faintly disordered, with a scent of cigars and polish lingering in the hall. "Capital! You made it!" cried Reggie, bounding down the steps. "Hastings, Monsieur Poirot! Come in, come in! The others are in the drawing-room." Inside, we found a curious collection of guests already assembled. Sir George Bartlett, a booming baronet whose laughter filled the room; Lionel Wade, a sleek fellow with watchful eyes, shuffling a pack of cards as if born to the task; Miss Violet Glenn, strikingly dark-haired and possessed of a smile both alluring and dangerous; and finally, a tall fair man, Charles Linton, whose attention toward Miss Glenn bordered on the proprietary. "A fine party," I murmured. "Indeed," said Poirot softly, "but already I perceive tensions." When Reggie had gone to see about dinner, Poirot leaned closer. "Monsieur Wade shuffles too smoothly, unprofessionnel perhaps. And that Mademoiselle Glenn, admired by many it seems. Admiration, Hastings, can be more perilous than debt." I laughed. "Surely you don't expect murder at a friendly weekend party?" He smiled faintly. "My friend, I expect nothing. I merely observe. But I tell you this, before this weekend concludes, there will be drama at Wheeldon Lodge." Chapter 2. Cards on the Table. Dinner at Wheeldon Lodge that evening was nothing short of extravagant. The long mahogany table groaned under a feast that could have satisfied a battalion. Rich soups, a perfectly roasted joint of beef, puddings that shimmered with treacle, and a parade of cheeses so abundant they might have fed the entire village. Sir George Bartlett, ever the booming baronet, declared each dish a triumph, while Reggie Frobisher regaled us with tales of his boxing victories. "Knocked him clean through the ropes, by thunder!" he exclaimed, slapping the table in delight. Lionel Wade, seated opposite me, was the very picture of composed refinement. His smile polite, his tone smooth, but his eyes sharp and assessing, as though silently correcting the manners of everyone at the table. Beside him, Miss Violet Glenn, striking in a dark gown that gleamed under the chandelier, sat between Sir George and the quiet Charles Linton. She bore Sir George's clumsy compliments with effortless poise, but reserved her real warmth for Linton. Once or twice I caught the faintest smile between them, a smile that spoke more than words ever could. Linton, ordinarily a man of subdued demeanor, seemed to awaken in her presence, his conversation growing animated, his laughter genuine. Across the table, Poirot ate with fastidious care, cutting everything into precise portions, as if he were conducting a scientific experiment. "The cabbage," he murmured to me in dismay, "has been assassinated." Beyond that, he said little, though his keen eyes flicked ceaselessly between the guests, noting every glance and gesture. After dinner, the company retired to the drawing-room where cigars, brandy, and coffee awaited. The fire glowed, laughter rippled through the air, and soon Lionel Wade produced, almost ceremoniously, a fresh deck of cards from his pocket. "A little poker to pass the evening," he suggested smoothly. "Capital idea," roared Sir George, already puffing great clouds of smoke. "Let's see whose luck holds tonight." Miss Glenn reclined gracefully in a nearby armchair. "Ah, you men and your cards," she said softly. "Always so sure of yourselves, until fortune changes her mind." "Luck, Miss Glenn?" Wade's smile deepened as he shuffled with a deftness that betrayed long practice. "A man makes his own luck, at cards as in life." Linton, his voice low but steady, interjected, "Not always. Some games are rigged before they even begin." Wade's gaze flicked to him, amusement glinting beneath the surface. "Do I detect an accusation?" "Not at all," Linton replied evenly. "Only an observation." Sir George's laugh boomed through the room. "Then let's test your theories, gentlemen." We gathered round the table. Poirot declined to play, claiming fatigue, but positioned himself in a corner where he could rest his little grey cells while still observing every move. The first few rounds were harmless. Reggie lost noisily and good-naturedly. Sir George roared at his own misfortunes. Wade's play was calm and mechanical, while Linton's was cautious, betraying a flicker of tension each time the stakes rose. Miss Glenn drifted over occasionally, leaning on the table with the lightest touch. Her presence unsettled both men in different ways. Wade became more deliberate, almost predatory, while Linton flushed at every glance. "You should join us, Miss Glenn," Wade suggested after raking in a modest pile of coins. She shook her head, her eyes glinting like onyx. "No, I prefer to observe. Men reveal far more when they think no one's watching." "And what have you discovered tonight?" Wade asked, amused. "That you play as though certain of victory," she replied, "and that Mr. Linton plays as though he fears defeat." A soft murmur of laughter followed. Linton's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot leaned toward me, his voice barely above a whisper. "You observe, Hastings? The lady strikes at the vanity of both men. A calculated thrust, delivered with precision." "She's teasing," I whispered back. He shook his head gently. "Teasing, yes, but with purpose. A woman who teases with such accuracy is either an artist or a strategist." The atmosphere thickened as the game wore on. The brandy glowed deeper, the laughter grew thinner. Reggie's enthusiasm bordered on reckless cheer, while Sir George's good humour could not disguise his steady losses. Wade's expression remained untroubled, his fingers handling the cards with the detachment of a surgeon. Then came the final hand. The stakes escalated swiftly, first pounds, then tens, then notes folded with quiet intensity. Only Linton and Wade remained. Linton's face was pale. Wade's was unreadable. Miss Glenn, standing behind them, offered the faintest of nods to Linton. He inhaled sharply, then pushed forward every last coin he had. "I'll see you," he said. Wade spread his hand with a flourish. 4 kings, a strong hand indeed. But Linton, with trembling fingers, revealed his own. 4 aces. A stunned silence followed. Then Sir George broke it with a thunderous laugh. "By Jove, well done, my boy!" Reggie whooped in delight. Wade's smile remained, but something had changed. His eyes narrowed, his tone as soft as velvet. "A bold gamble, Mr. Linton. One day such daring might cost more than you imagine." Linton gave a brief, uneasy laugh. The remark hung in the air like the smoke from Wade's cigar, thin, bitter, and lingering. Later, when the house had gone still and the corridors echoed faintly with distant chimes, I mentioned the game to Poirot. "Quite a stroke of luck for Linton, eh? Took Wade down neatly." "Luck?" Poirot repeated. "Non, mon ami, that was courage, and courage, Hastings, is rarely spent on shillings. He played not for money, but for the glance of Mademoiselle Glenn. That was the true wager tonight." I laughed. "You always see romance where I see common sense." "Romance?" He gave a tiny shrug. "Perhaps. But where men gamble for the smile of a woman, there, Hastings, lies the shadow of danger. Tonight was merely the first deal. Before this weekend ends, the final card will be played, and it will not be pleasant." I retired to my room, smiling at his melodrama, yet oddly uneasy. In the quiet darkness of the house, the smoke of Wade's cigar seemed still to drift about me, bitter, lingering, and foretelling trouble. Chapter 3. Death in the Lane. The morning broke grey and uncertain over Wen Lodge, a soft mist hanging low across the hedgerows and fields. The air carried that faint chill peculiar to early autumn, a quiet heaviness that promised rain. I was up before the rest, as years of army life had trained me to wake early and sleep poorly in unfamiliar quarters. The great hall was still and cold, faintly scented with polish and damp wool. A drowsy maid moved about the long table, setting out cups and silver with the mechanical care of someone not yet awake. Sir George was the first to appear, resplendent in a checkered tweed so loud it seemed to argue with the wallpaper. He demanded kippers before the clock struck 8, his voice booming across the hall like a hunting horn. Reggie followed soon after, bright-eyed and energetic, already in his breeches and gaiters, chattering about the morning's shoot. Then came Lionel Wade, crisp, polished, every fold of his cravat immaculate, as though his valet had ghosted in before dawn to tend to him. Poirot entered last, moving delicately as if he feared to crush the carpet underfoot. He gave me a faint nod before taking his seat, adjusting his napkin with the precision of a man performing surgery. We had just begun breakfast when Reggie suddenly frowned. "Where's Linton?" he asked. "He was to join us for the shoot." Sir George snorted. "Still abed, I'll wager. Young men today, no stamina, no sense of sport." Before anyone could reply, Miss Glenn entered. Her dark eyes, usually bright, carried a trace of unease. "I knocked at his door," she said softly. No answer. Wade smiled faintly. Perhaps the thrill of his winnings has exhausted him. Not everyone can take good fortune so calmly. Poirot looked up sharply. "Ah, so there was excitement last night?" Wade's smile did not falter. "Only a friendly game of cards. Mr. Linton was unusually lucky." It was then the maid, wringing her hands, confessed that Mr. Linton's bed had not been slept in at all. That simple statement chilled the air more than any draught. Reggie pushed back his chair. "Dash it all, he can't have gone far. Let's look for him before we set out." We agreed at once, and soon a small party was formed. Sir George took the lead, blustering through the mist with noisy determination. Miss Glenn followed, her quick steps betraying her worry. Poirot, wrapped neatly in his greatcoat, walked beside me in silence, his sharp gaze sweeping the muddy ground. Half a mile from the lodge, where the lane dipped between dripping hawthorn hedges, we found him. Charles Linton lay sprawled against the bank, his coat smeared with mud, his fair hair damp with dew. One arm was twisted beneath him, and a dark stain spread across his waistcoat. Miss Glenn gave a strangled cry and turned away. Sir George muttered a prayer and stooped, but Poirot was already kneeling, his fingertips hovering close to the body without touching. "He is dead," Poirot said quietly, his voice stripped of all emotion. Reggie's voice broke the stunned silence. "Murder, then? Poor fellow. But who could have done this?" We carried the body back under a heavy stillness, no one daring to speak. A gardener was sent to call the police, though we knew it would be some time before they reached us. In the drawing room, The guests gathered with pale faces and trembling hands. Poirot stood near the fireplace, the flickering flames glinting off his dark eyes as he turned his attention to each of us. "Sir George," he began, "you were first in the lane. Did you notice anything unusual before we found him?" "Nothing at all," Sir George grunted. "Just a rook taking off. Startled me, truth be told. Then I saw him. Poor chap." "Reggie?" Poirot asked. Reggie shook his head. "No accident, that much is clear. He didn't fall. Not like that." Miss Glenn's voice trembled. "He was alive, laughing only last night. Why would anyone—" Poirot's gaze lingered on her. "Indeed, mademoiselle, why?" Then he turned to Wade. The man's composure was unnerving. "A tragedy," he said evenly, "but the reason seems plain enough. Linton won a great deal at cards last night. He left with money in his pocket and was found dead in a lonely lane. Robbery, nothing more." Poirot's brows rose slightly. "Robbery, monsieur? Perhaps. Yet there are other motives, subtler ones." The room fell silent. The fire crackled. Miss Glenn clasped her hands tightly. Reggie shifted uneasily, and Sir George looked anywhere but at Poirot. Poirot began to pace slowly, his small shoes making soft clicks against the floor. "We set out this morning expecting a day of sport," he said thoughtfully, "but found instead the most dangerous game of all, the taking of a human life. Last night there was another kind of contest, was there not? A game of chance, of pride, of victory and humiliation. And the prize? Was it truly money, or something far more perilous?" His eyes moved from Miss Glenn's pale face to Wade's measured calm, then to Sir George, whose ruddy complexion had turned a shade deeper. Poirot's voice softened. "No, my friends, this is no mere quarrel over winnings. Beneath the surface of our laughter and leisure, there lies something darker. Resentment, desire, and secrets too old to name." Though the hearth blazed warmly, the chill in the room was unmistakable. Each of us felt it, the weight of suspicion settling like fog around Wen Lodge. Chapter 4. Beneath the Surface. Poirot had chosen the morning room for his inquiries. A long, low-ceilinged chamber lined with faded hunting prints and smelling faintly of beeswax and old leather. The fire crackled in the grate, casting a wavering glow across the polished furniture. Poirot positioned himself behind a small writing desk, as solemn and composed as a judge preparing to preside over a delicate case. His hands were neatly folded, his moustaches gleaming, his eyes bright with quiet anticipation. I settled opposite him, notebook ready, eager to capture every detail of his method. He wagged a finger at me with mock reproach. "Ah, Hastings, always you right. But do not forget, mon ami, facts are only half the story. It is in the pauses, the hesitations, the contradictions. There the truth hides." I smiled and nodded, secretly doubting whether I could ever perceive those invisible shades of meaning that he noticed so effortlessly. The butler entered first, his manner grave and his voice subdued. "Mr. Linton left the house just after midnight, sir," he reported. "No coat, no hat. He seemed troubled. Walked out into the fog." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you found that strange?" he asked softly. The butler hesitated. "It was not my place to comment, sir." Poirot's tone gentled, almost coaxing. "And yet you did think it strange, n'est-ce pas?" The man inclined his head. "Yes, sir, I did." Next came the parlour-maid, twisting her apron nervously. "I saw Miss Glenn in the corridor around that time," she whispered. "She had a shawl on, and she looked upset." Poirot nodded approvingly. "You have sharp eyes, mademoiselle. Remember, emotion leaves traces sharper than footprints." The gardener followed, cap in hand. "Heard voices in the lane, sir," he said simply. "Two men arguing fierce. One of them sounded like Mr. Wade, but I can't swear to it." Poirot thanked him with quiet courtesy. "Très bien, that will be all." When the man had gone, Poirot turned to me with a small, satisfied nod. "You see, Hastings, the quarrel was not imagination. Two men entered the fog that night. Only one returned." I shivered despite the warmth of the fire. Sir George was the first of the house guests to be interviewed. He filled the doorway like a conquering general, his face flushed with indignation. "Dashed awful business," he boomed, settling heavily into a chair. "Never seen the like. Young fellow cut down in his prime. Disgusting." "You liked Mr. Linton, perhaps?" Poirot asked mildly. "Liked him? Yes, why not? Decent chap, rode well, kept his head down, quiet sort, good breeding. Not one of your braggarts." "You played cards with him last night?" Sir George nodded. "A few hands, yes. Lost a bit, but laughed it off. That's the way of things. But Wade's the one to watch. Plays like he was born with a deck in his hand. Too smooth, if you ask me." Poirot leaned forward. "You thought him dangerous?" "Dangerous? I wouldn't go that far, but I didn't like the look on his face when Linton beat him. Smiling, yes, but the wrong sort of smile. I've seen that look in the field, when one man clears a fence and another falls. The one who smiles isn't pleased for you, Hastings. He's furious inside." "Très bien," murmured Poirot. "You believe the quarrel lay between Linton and Wade?" "If there was a quarrel, yes. But don't think I'm accusing the man outright. Just telling you what I saw." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Sir George. You have been most helpful." Then came Reggie, all restless energy and dishevelled nerves, still splattered with mud from the lane. "Ghastly business, Poirot," he blurted out. "Can't get it out of my head. Poor old Charles lying there like that." "You were fond of him?" "Liked him tremendously," Reggie said quickly. "Quiet, decent sort. Could play a good hand but never show off. Not like Wade. He's clever, but he plays to win, to crush." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Ah, you think Monsieur Wade enjoys not only victory, but the humiliation of others?" "Exactly," Reggie said. "He smiled when he lost, but you could see it. It burned him up. And then there's Violet Glenn. She was watching Linton the whole evening. Everyone saw it. That's why he took that big risk. He wanted to impress her." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And Wade noticed?" "Of course he did. You could see it in his face. But look here, Poirot, Violet Glenn isn't worth killing over." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, my friend, who can measure the worth of a woman in the eyes of a jealous man? Logic does not enter the heart." Then Lionel Wade entered, poised, elegant, his composure immaculate. He sat with calculated grace, one ankle resting upon his knee. "A tragic affair, monsieur," he said smoothly. "But surely the answer is plain. Robbery. Linton left with his winnings. Some local ruffian saw an opportunity." Poirot's tone was light. "And you are certain it was robbery?" "Of course. His pockets were empty." "Obvious things," Poirot murmured, "are often arranged to appear so." He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, monsieur, what did you feel when you lost last night?" "Nothing," Wade replied coolly. "One cannot win every hand." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "your hand trembled when you laid down your cards. You smiled, but it was the smile of a man swallowing something bitter." Wade's composure faltered for the first time. "I dislike losing," he said stiffly. "That is no crime." "No, monsieur," Poirot said. "But humiliation, that is motive enough for murder. And last night it was not only the cards that humiliated you, but the eyes of a woman. Wade's jaw tightened. You mean Violet Glenn? She may smile as she pleases. Spoken like a philosopher, Poirot said quietly. And yet the gardener heard your voice in the lane. The gardener imagines things. Fog distorts sound. I was in my room. Alone? Poirot asked. Entirely. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, monsieur. That will be all. Finally, Violet Glenn entered. The air in the room seemed to shift with her presence. She wore a dark wrap, her face pale, her eyes bright with restrained emotion. Must we continue this, Monsieur Poirot? Charles is dead. Let him rest. Poirot's voice softened. Alas, mademoiselle, the dead cannot rest until the truth is revealed. You cared for him deeply, I think. Yes, she whispered. Then, firmer, I loved him. He was kind, and he listened. That may seem small, but to me it was everything. And yet you urged him to play last night. He doubted himself. I wanted him to believe he could win. I gave him courage, and perhaps that made Wade jealous. But I never led Wade on. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And yet you fear him. She lifted her chin. I fear no man, but Charles, he feared something. He said to me last night, if anything happens to me, remember, it wasn't the cards that ruined me. He laughed afterward, but there was fear in his eyes. I saw it. Poirot leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Très intéressant. You have given me the key, mademoiselle. When the interviews ended, Poirot sat in silence, fingers steepled, eyes half closed. Well, Hastings, he said at last, and your conclusion? That Wade killed him, I answered immediately. He was jealous, humiliated, furious at losing. The quarrel in the lane proves it. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, Hastings, ever the gallant but impatient hound. You chase the scent, but perhaps it is the wrong one. Remember what Linton said. It was not the cards that ruined me. No, mon ami, the truth lies deeper. The crime we chase is not born of greed, but of the heart. He rose then, his eyes glinting like steel. One final act remains. We must gather them all together, for it is time, Hastings, to lay the last cards upon the table. Chapter 5. The Truth in the Garden. It was not a polite request from Hercule Poirot. It was a command cloaked in civility. By 3 o'clock, we were all summoned to the terrace of Wen Lodge. The garden below stretched out in a dreary palette of browns and greys. The once bright roses now hung wilted and heavy with rain. A pale mist threaded through the hedges, softening the edges of the autumn afternoon. The air was sharp with damp earth, and even the bravest among us seemed diminished in colour and spirit. Sir George stood rigidly in his outrageous tweed checks, trying to appear defiant but looking more bluster than courage. Reggie shifted restlessly, his cheeks flushed, his hands betraying a nervous energy. Lionel Wade, cool as ever, wore his composure like armour, every button and fold of his attire precise. Miss Violet Glenn looked pale but resolute, her dark eyes betraying a mix of fear and defiance. Even the servants had gathered discreetly nearby, the butler hovering at the French doors and the gardener twisting his cap in nervous hands. Poirot stood before us, small but commanding, his patent leather shoes untouched by the damp stones. His voice, when he spoke, carried that peculiar quiet authority that silenced even the wind. My friends, he began, his accent crisp, we are not gathered here to lament the dead, but to uncover truth. Charles Linton is gone. The police will arrive, yes, but before they do, I must see clearly what happened here, in this house, and in that fog-bound lane. A tense stillness gripped us. Sir George gave a meaningless cough. Reggie stared at his boots. Miss Glenn clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles whitened. Only Wade met Poirot's gaze without flinching, calm and unyielding. Poirot continued softly. "We have heard many explanations. Sir George believes it was robbery. Mr. Wade agrees. Mademoiselle Glenn speaks of jealousy. And my good friend Hastings," he inclined his head toward me, "suspects Mr. Wade himself. Yet, my friends, appearances, always they deceive." His gaze darted to Sir George. "You told us earlier you noticed nothing unusual, yet just now you mentioned a rook rising from the hedgerow. Why did you not tell me this before?" Sir George coloured fiercely. "A rook? Nothing to it, man. Birds fly at shadows." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Non, non, my friend. A rook takes flight when disturbed. By whom, I wonder? A passer-by, or two men in angry conversation?" Sir George stiffened. "I can't say. Don't badger me, sir." Poirot let him be and turned to Reggie. "You were fond of Charles Linton, were you not?" Reggie's eyes brightened briefly. "Of course I was. A fine chap." "And yet," Poirot said, his voice smooth as silk, "you spoke of Miss Glenn's admiration for him. You did not feel resentment, perhaps?" Reggie flushed to the roots of his hair. "That's unfair. I liked him, yes, and Violet cared for him, everyone knew that. But jealousy? Never. I'd sooner have congratulated him." Miss Glenn's head turned sharply at that, her expression unreadable. Poirot's gaze lingered on her for a moment before sliding to Lionel Wade. "You, monsieur, speak most confidently of robbery. Why so certain?" Wade's tone was as smooth as his posture. "Because it is obvious. His winnings vanished. His pockets were emptied. What other explanation fits?" Poirot raised a finger. "Ah, but tell me, why was his watch untouched? A true thief does not discriminate." For the first time, Wade hesitated. "Perhaps the thief was interrupted," he murmured. "Perhaps," Poirot said, leaning forward slightly. "And yet, the gardener tells us he heard two voices arguing in the lane, one of them not unlike yours, monsieur." Wade's face chilled. "Country imaginations. Fog distorts sound." "Fog," Poirot said sharply, "does not argue. Men do." He turned suddenly to Miss Glenn. "You told me, mademoiselle, that Charles Linton said to you, 'If anything happens to me, it won't be the cards that ruin me.' What did he mean?" Her voice trembled. I don't know. He was uneasy that night, but he refused to say more." "You are certain?" Poirot pressed. Her eyes flashed indignantly. "Are you suggesting I kept something back? I would never betray him." Poirot's tone softened. "And yet betrayal, it is a word that returns to me again and again." At that moment, the gardener cleared his throat. "Beg pardon, sir," he said nervously. "There's something I didn't mention. After those voices, I heard footsteps, two men walking off together. Later, I heard only one set returning." A ripple of unease spread through the group. Poirot's eyes gleamed like wet stones. "You hear, Hastings. Two went into the fog. Only one came back. This was no robbery, no chance quarrel. Linton trusted the one who walked beside him, and that trust led him to death." The silence that followed was thick as the mist itself. Sir George muttered something under his breath. Reggie gave a strangled exclamation. Miss Glenn went paper white. Wade stared ahead, his expression frozen, his mask beginning to crack. Poirot drew himself up, surveying us with quiet finality. "Charles Linton did not die for a handful of banknotes. His empty pockets were meant to mislead. No, he died for something deeper, for pride, for jealousy, and perhaps for love." No one dared speak. The air itself seemed to tremble, heavy with suspicion and secrets. Poirot lifted a finger. "Patience. I accuse no one, yet, but tonight, mes amis, we shall meet again. The final card will be played, and the truth will reveal itself. We drifted away slowly, each man and woman lost in private thought. As I walked beside Poirot, I whispered, "You're certain, aren't you? It was Wade?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Always you leap ahead, mon ami. Perhaps Wade, or perhaps another. Remember, in murder, money is rarely the true motive. It is the heart that betrays, and where the heart leads, danger follows." He left me there, staring into the mist that curled around the dying garden, my mind as clouded as the air itself. Chapter 6. The last card. Night had fallen over Wen Lodge, casting long shadows that quivered in the glow of the firelight. We gathered once more in the drawing room, summoned not by courtesy, but by command. The fire crackled in the great hearth, throwing restless reflections on the panelled walls, and every flicker seemed to deepen the tension in the room. It was as though the air itself had grown brittle, ready to snap. Each of us sat quietly, carrying the heavy knowledge that this night would bring revelation, perhaps ruin. Poirot stood by the mantelpiece, his posture flawless, his fingertips pressed together in a gesture of perfect composure. The little man looked strangely luminous, his grey-green eyes burning with certainty. "Mes amis," he began softly, "the hour has come to lay down the final card. This morning, we found poor Charles Linton lifeless in the lane. It appeared at first to be a robbery, his pockets turned out, his winnings gone. Yet from the beginning, I said to myself, 'Ah, these empty pockets, they speak too loudly, they are meant to mislead.'" He turned, surveying us as though he could see through skin and bone into the truths we tried to hide. "The motive," he said, "was not of gold or silver, but of something older, something born of the heart. Now, let us consider. Who gained from Linton's death? Not in fortune, but in feeling." Poirot's eyes came to rest on Lionel Wade. "Monsieur Wade, you had your pride, your vanity, your jealousy. You lost to Linton at the card table. More deeply, you lost to him in the admiration of Mademoiselle Glenn. You quarrelled with him in the lane. These facts make you perhaps the simplest suspect." Wade stiffened, his expression guarded but his hands betraying a tremor. Poirot's moustache twitched. "But no, monsieur, you are not my man. The guilty seldom talk much, and yet you have spoken too often, too eagerly of robbery. The innocent, you see, they protest too much." A murmur swept the room. Sir George looked utterly perplexed, his brow furrowed beneath the weight of confusion. Reggie Frobisher muttered under his breath, "Then who the devil did it, if not Wade?" Poirot's gaze moved to Violet Glenn, seated rigidly in her chair, her fingers interlaced in a silent battle for composure. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "you cared deeply for Charles Linton, that much is certain. He returned that affection, and yet he was afraid. He warned you, did he not, that it was not cards that would destroy him?" She hesitated, her voice trembling. "Yes, he said that, but I didn't understand." Poirot inclined his head. He feared not debt, but emotion, not ruin of the purse, but of the heart. There was another involved, was there not? A triangle, always dangerous: love, jealousy, rivalry. His words fell like stones in still water. Suddenly, Reggie sprang to his feet, his face flushed with fury. "Enough, Poirot! Leave her out of this!" Poirot turned toward him, his expression curiously tender. "Ah," he said softly, "so it is you, Monsieur Frobisher." Reggie froze, colour draining from his face. Slowly, he sank back into his chair, his hands covering his eyes. Poirot's voice grew calm, almost sorrowful. "It was not Wade's pride, but your jealousy that killed Charles Linton. You hid your feelings beneath a mask of friendship, but the heart, the heart cannot lie. You loved Mademoiselle Glenn. You could not endure seeing her love another. Reggie's shoulders shook. I never meant to. I just wanted him to let her go. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. You walked with him into the mist, two friends, so it seemed. The gardener heard your quarrel, the anger in your voices. Two men went into that lane, only one returned. You struck him down in passion, and then, in foolish haste, you tried to make it seem a robbery. But you forgot the detail that betrays every liar, the watch still in his pocket. Reggie looked up, his face ashen. It was an accident. I swear it. We struggled. He slipped. I didn't mean to. His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands. Violet gave a soft cry, part horror, part heartbreak. Oh, Reggie, how could you? Poirot bowed his head slightly. So, Hastings, you see, it was not greed that killed Charles Linton, but jealousy, the oldest poison of all. It began as love and ended in death. The little grey cells can expose the mind, yes, but only the heart explains the crime. For a long while, the only sound in the room was the steady crackle of the fire. Sir George sat solemn, Wade unreadable, and Violet Glenn shaken to the core. Reggie Frobisher stared into nothingness, a man hollowed out by regret. Poirot sighed, smoothing his moustache with quiet fatigue. The police will take their course. For us, mes amis, the game is done, the last card is played. He turned from the fire, his small frame suddenly heavy with the burden of human folly. For all his brilliance, even Hercule Poirot seemed wearied by the passions that so often drive men to ruin. Epilogue. Return to Whitehaven Mansions. 2 days later, the fog and silence of the countryside were replaced by the bustle of London. Poirot and I were once again in our familiar sitting room at Whitehaven Mansions. The world outside roared with traffic, but inside there was only the comforting scent of polish and the faint hiss of the kettle. Poirot was bent over a pair of patent leather shoes, buffing them until they gleamed like dark mirrors. Well, Poirot, I said at last, I must confess I didn't see it coming. I was certain Wade was guilty. Poirot chuckled softly without looking up. Ah, mon ami, you always chase the loudest bark, but often it is the quiet dog that bites. I sighed. Still, I can't help feeling sorry for poor Reggie. He wasn't evil, just a man ruled by his emotions. Precisely, Poirot replied, holding a shoe up to the light. It is not the mind, but the heart that drives most crimes. Jealousy, Hastings. It is like a worm inside a perfect apple. The surface appears flawless, yet within it devours. I hesitated, then asked, And Miss Glenn? Do you think she truly loved Linton? Poirot's eyes sparkled mischievously. Perhaps, mon ami, or perhaps she loved only the reflection of herself in his eyes. Women, they are most enigmatic creatures. But of one thing I am certain. She will recover more swiftly than she believes. He set the polished shoes neatly aside, smoothing his moustache with contentment. And you, Hastings, remember this. The cards, they are dangerous, not for the money they cost, but for the truths they reveal. In cards, as in love, it is not the hand one holds that determines fate. It is how one plays it. I laughed softly. Then I shall tread carefully at my next game. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his eyes half closed, the ghost of a smile upon his lips. Do so, mon ami, for even in games as in life, passion is the most treacherous of stakes. The fire flickered warmly, and for a brief moment, London seemed far away. Once again, I found myself admiring the quiet genius of the little Belgian who could find philosophy in the gleam of a shoe or the fall of a card. Here's a fully revised original 6-chapter analytical breakdown of Agatha Christie's A Game of Hearts. Chapter 1. A game begins. The story opens at Lady Helena Vaughan's glittering Mayfair card party, where charm and rivalry mingle beneath the chandeliers. Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings observe the gathering, elegant faces concealing quiet tension. Among them, the young socialite Daphne Lorimer radiates defiance, speaking cynically of love as a losing hand. Poirot, amused yet alert, senses that the night's game of hearts extends far beyond the card table. Each gesture, each glance hints at tangled emotions waiting to ignite. What we learn, even in rooms filled with laughter, envy, and desire, can move unseen. Moral lesson: where pride governs affection, love becomes a contest instead of a bond. Viewer question: do you think love mixed with competition can ever end peacefully? Chapter 2. The card turns. The next morning shatters the party's glamour. Daphne Lorimer is discovered unconscious in her flat, a wine glass toppled beside her. A note lies nearby, vague enough to suggest despair. Hastings leans toward tragedy, but Poirot notices subtle irregularities. The glass positioned too precisely, the handwriting on the note slightly wrong. The apparent suicide begins to look like a deliberate performance staged for effect. What we learn: the truth rarely shouts. It whispers through what feels just a little too perfect. Moral lesson: deception gains strength when it imitates grief. Viewer question: would you have believed the scene at first glance or sensed the trick behind it? Chapter 3. Suspicions in Silk. Poirot visits Lady Helena, whose sympathy for Daphne feels practiced. Her polished composure hides something fragile. A half-burned letter in her hearth suggests an apology never sent, while the servants speak of a quarrel heard the night before. Major Sanderson, a guest infatuated with Helena, grows defensive when questioned. Poirot begins to see the social web: admiration turned obsession, affection turned threat. What we learn: in high society, emotions are edited for display, but truth seeps through the cracks. Moral lesson: repressed jealousy can disguise itself as good manners. Viewer question: which is more dangerous, open anger or concealed envy? Chapter 4. The Poisoned Hand. Laboratory results confirm Poirot's suspicion. Daphne's collapse came from a rare, slow-acting toxin. The poison was placed in her drink by someone intimate enough to anticipate her habits. A forged letter in Helena's handwriting links her to the act, yet Poirot holds back judgment. He notices that the ink used for the forgery matches a bottle on Major Sanderson's desk. Each revelation twists the pattern tighter. Affection, pride, and vengeance intertwining like cards in a shuffled deck. What we learn: passion and deceit often share the same language. Both promise devotion, both conceal danger. Moral lesson: the closer the relationship, the sharper the betrayal can strike. Viewer question: is betrayal worse when it comes from love rather than hatred? Chapter 5. Truth on display. Poirot gathers everyone in Lady Helena's drawing room, staging his own performance of revelation. Piece by piece, he recounts how Sanderson, jealous of Daphne's rejection and eager to please Helena, forged the letter and spiked the wine to frame the woman he adored. His crime was born not from hatred, but the desperate wish to be noticed. The polished host and her admirer stand exposed, one complicit in vanity, the other undone by obsession. What we learn: evil often dresses itself in devotion. Moral lesson: when affection demands control, it ceases to be love at all. Viewer question: do you believe obsessive love can ever be called love, or is it simply possession? Chapter 6. The Final Deal. With the culprit unmasked, silence settles over the grand room like dust. Poirot observes quietly as Lady Helena realizes the cost of her vanity. Her reputation saved, but her conscience stained. Daphne survives, disillusioned yet free, while Sanderson faces justice. Poirot muses that in this game of hearts, everyone gambled and everyone lost. The final image is one of quiet reckoning, where truth stands alone amid the ruins of elegance. What we learn: pride, envy, and desire form a triangle sharper than any weapon. Moral lesson: only sincerity can survive in the dangerous game of appearances. Viewer question: if you were in Poirot's place, would you feel pity or satisfaction at the outcome? Let's discuss key characters. At the center stands Hercule Poirot, whose keen perception cuts through the charm and deceit of high society. His calm logic unravels emotions that others mistake for manners, showing how jealousy can disguise itself in silk. Beside him, Captain Hastings observes with a mix of admiration and confusion, representing the ordinary moral compass against the polished deceit surrounding them. Lady Helena Vaughan, elegant and self-assured, becomes the story's most complex figure, a woman whose pride and social standing hide deep insecurity. Her vanity fuels the conflict, setting off a dangerous chain of emotional manipulation. Miss Daphne Lorimer, the young and outspoken socialite, serves as both victim and mirror to Helena's ambition. Her defiance exposes the hypocrisy of those who mistake cruelty for sophistication. Major Sanderson emerges as the agent of tragedy. His obsessive affection for Helena and jealousy of Daphne drive him toward deceit and destruction. His desire to be noticed transforms into the crime that topples their fragile world. Colin Brent, a secondary guest and sharp observer of human nature, provides subtle insight into the social tension that others overlook. He helps Poirot piece together motive from emotion. In contrast, Inspector Giles, the local officer assisting Poirot, grounds the investigation in practicality, representing duty and reason within the emotional chaos. Each of these characters serves as a facet of a single theme: the human heart's dangerous need for recognition, love, and control. Together, they form a portrait of society's polished cruelty, where affection, envy, and pride collide behind smiles. Final thoughts and outro: A Game of Hearts. And so concludes A Game of Hearts, a tale where love, pride, and envy played more dangerously than any deck of cards. Beneath the laughter of the poker table and the civility of country life, human emotion once again proved to be the deadliest weapon of all. What began as a harmless weekend gathering revealed the timeless truth that Agatha Christie herself so often explored. Murder rarely begins in malice alone, but in the quiet corners of the heart, where jealousy festers and reason falters. Poirot, ever the master of deduction, reminded us that reason and morality are not always enough to shield mankind from his own passions. Even the smallest gesture, a glance across a card table, can set in motion the tragedy of fate. Reggie's downfall was not born of cruelty, but of love twisted into desperation, a reminder that in every heart lies the potential for both tenderness and destruction. As the mists of Wheeldon Lodge fade and the echoes of confession drift into silence, one lesson endures. Truth, like the ace hidden at the bottom of the deck, will always reveal itself in time. And while Poirot may return to his polished shoes and quiet apartment, his words linger. It is not the cards we draw that decide our fate, but the choices we make once they are dealt. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep these classic tales alive and brings more Poirot adventures to life, one mystery at a time.